We're gonna try it. We're gonna try him again. Eric, are you there?
Can you hear me, Carl?
I got you. All right. Good as gold. All right, so we'll continue with Governor Abbott later and the things that he's going to be allowed to do now that he's declared an invasion on the southern border. But Eric, listen, it's an honor and a pleasure to have you on. I was sitting here, I was sitting around earlier, just reading through columns, reading through AM Greatness. Actually, this was the other day, and I saw the last election, and I almost didn't want to read it because I'll just be honest with you. I'm very concerned where we are in America today. And I do believe that we live in a post-constitutional, a post-Christian, a post-Judeo-Christian America. And I'm like, God, what do we need to do to bring it back? And then I read your article, Eric, and I was like, oh, my God, Lord, help us. Anyway, I want to get into this. First off, let's debunk some things. You started off debunking several things why the left is gleeful that they did better in the elections than they expected, but they didn't know how well they were going to do. No one knew what was going to happen, how things were going to shake out. I went from this is going to be a red wave to whoa, no, it's not, to oh my God, I feel it again. I think this is going to happen. No one knew. No one has cracked the code. If you would explain that, and then let's get on to some of the debunking some of the Democrats' dreams, and then I want to get into we'll take those issues one by one, and then we'll get into some of the real issues that we need to be concerned about here in America. So no one cracked the code. Explain what you mean by that.
So basically, of course, what happened here is that ultimately they did have a better performance. The Democrats have every right to claim victory after what happened on Tuesday. I hate to say it, but it's true. But sure. As you said, it was not because of abortion. It was not because of January 6th. It was not because of our democracy, election deniers. They love to throw those phrases around. And it wasn't because of President Donald J. Trump. You look at some of the things here. If I wanted to go through these real quickly, just the abortion issue. I mean,
yes, again, let's do it. Let's take them one by one.
All right. With Dobbs, right, they immediately made this the number one policy issue. Abortion. There's going to be a wave of pro-choice voters. That clearly did not happen. Now, you had a couple of states that ultimately passed measures to enshrine abortion in their state constitutions. California, Michigan, Vermont. Deep blue states, obviously that was going to happen. Then you had red states, Montana and Kentucky, vote to shoot down pro-life measures. But the interesting thing here is when you look at Kentucky, deep red state, right, it shot down a pro-life measure by 5 points. And yet on the same ballot, Senator Rand Paul, one of the best in Congress, gets reelected by 24 points? How does that make any sense? Wouldn't those voters cross over to vote for his pro-choice, abortion-loving Democrat opponent? Of course, it would stand to reason that that's what would happen. Same thing in Montana. They shot down a pro-life measure by 6 points. But the Republicans ultimately managed to hold both of the states' congressional seats. Wouldn't one or both of those flip on that pro-choice wave? Clearly what happens here is that, like with the Kansas pro-life measure earlier this year, these voters are absolutely single issue. They will come out, vote on abortion, and go home. They won't vote for Democrats. They won't vote down ballot. So throw that abortion argument in the trash. That doesn't explain it.
And
January
it doesn't
6th,
explain. Eric, let me just say this real quick. I mean, I live in Florida, and we had our legislature and our governor Ron DeSantis. We slapped a 15-week ban on abortion. I wish it went even further, but it didn't play out in the elections whatsoever.
Exactly. They made it seem like a bigger issue than it really was because they live in a bubble. That's what they do. They're social media coastal elite bubble. And the same can be said for January 6th. I love this one. So, of course, from the very beginning, it's always been insurrection, J6 is worse than 9/11. Then when it finally came down to the ballot box, you had two races in particular that are worth talking about. Virginia's 2nd Congressional District, Elaine Luria, an incumbent Democrat who was a member of the J6 committee, lost her re-election bid to Republican challenger Jen Kiggins. And over in Florida, in the 7th District there, another J6 committee member, Stephanie Murphy, decided to retire, and now we know why. The seat ended up flipping red. Republican Corey Mills defeated Democrat Karen Green. When you consider, of course, that Liz Cheney and Kinzinger, the only two Republicans on the committee, are gone already, and the other 5 Democrats, Zoe Lofgren, Jamie Raskin, they're all in deep, deep blue seats. These two seats, they're basically swing districts represented by the J6 committee, and they both lost. They were won by Republicans. So clearly voters in those districts don't care for the J6 narrative either. So stick a fork in that one. That doesn't explain it. And then in conjunction with that, our democracy. I love this one. Jeff Bezos' newspaper, as I like to call it, the Washington Compost, they have a comprehensive they've been doing a comprehensive tracking of election deniers, people running for office who don't believe in the results of the 2020 election. According to them, 291 candidates running for office across the country this year, all Republicans, who had some doubts about the election. Of those 291, 176 have won their elections, 107 have lost, and 8 remain undecided. That's a 60% victory rate for people who had criticisms of the 2020 election. And these aren't just Republicans in deep red seats like Wyoming. This is Senator-elect J.D. Vance in Ohio, Attorney General-elect Chris Kobach in Kansas, who, by the way, on the same ballot that Kansas voted to reelect their Democrat governor, Laura Kelly, they voted to elect Chris Kobach, who obviously has problems with the 2020 election. And Congressman-elect Eli Crane in Arizona's 2nd District, who flipped that seat from incumbent Democrat Tom O'Halloran. So even in swing districts, voters there either, again, do not care about the democracy argument, or they agree with these candidates that clearly there were problems in the 2020 election. And then lastly, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just going to say real quick, the last issue too on, of course, President Donald J. Trump. This is something that some conservatives in the media like to agree with the left right now, is that Trump is responsible. It was Trump's loss. Trump cost us this election. But yes, while some Trump-endorsed candidates did lose, there were plenty of Trump-endorsed candidates who won. Again, J.D. Vance in Ohio, Senator-elect Ted Budd in North Carolina, Senator Ron Johnson in Wisconsin was reelected. There were just as many wins for pro-Trump candidates as there were losses. You really can't blame him for one without crediting him for the other.
Eric, let's hold it right there. If you can stick with me after the break, I want to go into some of the things that we do need to be really concerned about as Americans on the other side. I'm speaking with Eric Lindrum of AM Greatness. We'll be back.
Everybody's got their cups, but they ain't chipped in. The Officer Tatum Show.
All right, welcome back to the Officer Tatum Show. I'm your guest host, Carl Jackson, sitting in for the Officer Tatum. I'm speaking with Eric Lindrum. He is a producer of America First with Dr. Sebastian Gorka. He is also currently a co-host of the Right Take podcast. He's also worked on re-election campaigns, including that of Congressman Devin Nunes that we all love in California District 22. Now he's with True Social, heading up True Social. So, Eric, let's get back to your column here. We talked about all of the issues that the left claimed. And honestly, Eric, that establishment Republicans would have you believe were the issues. Abortion was the issue. Donald Trump was the issue. I mean, for God's sakes, I've even heard some quote-unquote conservative commentators speaking up all of this nonsense. And I'm sitting there thinking, like, you crackheads, it's like you don't even want to win, I guess. It makes no sense whatsoever. But there are real issues that we need to be talking about and that we need to be thinking about, because there are some dangers to America, and let's talk about them. The first thing, you talk about the inevitable demographic shift. Let's talk about that.
That is the bad news, unfortunately. The first half of the article is the good news, debunking these reasons, J6, abortion. Then we got to get to the reality, which is arguably even worse than any of those things. What this can be described as most simply is these are our absolute worst culture war fears realized. They are reality now. And we've talked, of course, about the phrase, you may have heard it before, demographics is destiny, and especially with regards to the open border. Just today, Chuck Schumer declaring we need to give amnesty to all the dreamers, to all the 11 million undocumented immigrants who are here, 11 million, however many there are here. And that, of course, is a problem, but it can be solved with a common sense America First immigration policy, a.k.a. what the Trump administration was doing. Unfortunately, there's another demographic at play here that I think has come to fruition now with the 2022 election. And it's the one demographic you can't change. You physically, literally cannot change it, because that would require the human race to suddenly develop the technology to stop the passage of time. I'm, of course, talking about age.
Yes.
And this is the one's exit poll from CNN that was really making the rounds on social media. Dr. Gorka shared it. Some of my friends showed it to me. It was this exit poll on the voting preferences of age groups.
Right.
Voters aged 65 and older voted GOP by 13 points. Sounds about right. Voters between the ages of 45 and 64 voted for Republicans by 11 points. Then the lower you go, the worse it gets.
Right.
The ages of between 30 and 44, basically the oldest of millennials and some of Gen X, they went Democrat by 2 points. And then last, certainly not least, 18 to 29. That's the rest of millennials and also the youngest generation right now, Generation Z, also known as Zoomers. They went for Democrats by 28 points. This is catastrophic. If we do not do something about this right now, and I would argue at this point, I hate to say this, I like to give good news. It might already be too late. These are the fruits of the decades of indoctrination we have talked about in education, on social media, which certainly accelerated the problem, and in pop culture. We talked,
Eric,
of course, about. Go ahead.
Let me. I want to get your take on something. So in the first hour, I talked about this column that Avita Duffy wrote, the daughter of Rachel Campbell Duffy, and excellent article talking about how the Republican leadership, Mitch McConnell, Kevin McCarthy, Ronna McDaniel, Tom Emmer. There was no effort put forth to recruit or to go after the young college age voters, Generation Z, whatsoever on college campuses, despite the fact that many of them were feeling frustrated as to how they were treated during the COVID lockdowns. And she was like, it wasn't even like they tried and just screwed up. Like, there was no ground game. There was nothing, like no strategy whatsoever. And obviously, listen, we're not gonna win that age group, but we can put a dent in it. And for God's sakes, who knows? There may be leaders amongst those people that'll persuade even more Generation Zers. But part of the problem is we're not even in the fight on some of these issues. And I think that's what scares me when it comes to the border. You're right. For God's sakes, I don't even hear Republicans. They hate Trump so much. I don't even hear them talking about closing the border, as it were, except for the normal handful of Republicans that do so.
Exactly. The Republicans have always focused on older voters, understandably so, because they're reliably Republican. And even the culture war, I spent the last year, ever since Virginia, saying culture war is a winning issue. The economy was fine when Glenn Youngkin ran. There was no gas price issues, no inflation. He ran on the hard-hitting cultural issues, critical race theory, transgenderism, and mandates and lockdowns under the broad umbrella of education. And they won a complete red wave victory in Virginia. But unfortunately, what we're seeing now is that the Democrats realized they didn't need to win over those voters we were going for. We were going for the angry parents, the ones protesting at school board meetings, which was understandable. But we did not count on, for every angry parent prepared to turn out and vote for Republicans to shut down this cultural nonsense, the Democrats were prepared to turn out the kids who do believe in it, the kids who are already brainwashed. We spent so much time talking about the culture war, but we may have gotten started fighting it just a little too late. And the real problem here, if I may, because one other counter-argument I hear all the time is the Winston Churchill quote, right? Or I believe it's attributed to Churchill. If you're not liberal when you're younger, you don't have a heart. If you're not conservative when you're older, you don't have a brain. You get mugged by reality as you get older and pay taxes and own property, whatever. But unfortunately, I think it's different in this generation. I mentioned it in the article. One of the key things here is that America has always been a Christian nation. Christianity has always been Judeo-Christian values at the bedrock of our society from the very beginning. But over the last few decades, there's been just such a decline in religious affiliation, in church attendance, and especially among younger generations. They're atheists, they're a-religious, they're I'm spiritual, not religious, that kind of meme you may have heard before. And so what fills that void of, the idea of a religion and something bigger and greater than yourself beyond this life? The politics. Political affiliation is now, for these generations, especially Zoomers and also millennials, it's not just something you do every 2, 4, 6 years. You get out and vote. It is a way of life for them. It is an existential crisis, global warming, diversity and multiculturalism, fighting for the oppressed, taking on systemic racism. They really treat this as a belief system. So, and it's so ingrained, again, with social media, their social scenes in general, all their friends and their boyfriends and girlfriends all believe in it. And because it's basically a religious fervor for them now, you're not going to be able to convince them to suddenly switch over and vote Republican any more than you can go walk up to a lifelong Catholic on the street and say, hey, you should stop being Catholic. You should really consider leaving Catholicism. It's that bad.
Eric, you know what? You make a case that I've been making for quite some time, and that is, we just have 30 seconds left here, and that is the church needs to be involved in some of these culture wars. You can't just sit on the pulpit. You can't just sit behind four walls. You have to help people to understand what Christianity or what Judaism looks like practically outside of the synagogue, outside of the church walls. We got about 10 seconds. It's all yours, Eric.
Thank you so much again for having me on, Carl. This is an important discussion that has to be had. You can follow my work at American Greatness, amgreatness.com, and also the podcast I co-host once a week at righttakepodcast.com. Righttakepodcast.com.
All right, Eric. Thank you, man. We got to connect a podcast to podcast.